I want to find out how much of an impact injury proneness has on a team across a season in Football Manager. As someone who will routinely refuse to sign world-class players with reoccurring injuries, am I missing a trick here by not signing them? Injury proneness is a hidden attribute in the game which dictates how often a player can get injured. A player with 1 injury proneness out of 20 means they won't get injured very often at all, whereas a player with 20 out of 20 for injury proneness means they are much more likely to get injured again and again and again. And so today we're going to do a test and an experiment to find out how much of an impact injury proneness can have on a team across a season. I've created a full system here with 20 identical teams in place. Every single player is an absolute clone of each other, aside from the fact that in Team 1, Injury Proneness 1, all the players there have 1 out of 20 injury proneness, all the way down to Injury Proneness 20, where they have 20 out of 20 for injury proneness. We're going to simulate a season and find out the results at the end of it. Now, logically, you will assume that Injury Proneness 1 will win the league title because they have the fewest injuries across the season, and Injury Proneness 20 will come bottom. But my hypothesis is a little bit different. I think that injury proneness is a lot less important than you would imagine it to be. And I think we're going to see a much wider spread of teams across this division. I think that the squad depth is a lot more important, and having a good enough team to rotate around and battle for the title is much more important than trying to avoid players who have got high potential for injuries. So I do think that in this particular experiment, we are going to see a trend of the lower injury proneness teams towards the top and the higher injury proneness teams towards the bottom, just because we are taking this experiment to the nth degree. Every single player has the exact same injury proneness. In reality, when you're playing the game, you might have a few players with very high injury proneness and quite a lot with quite low injury proneness. It's going to be a lot more mixed up in your own save files. This obviously takes it to the next level. Obviously, injuries can be a really big talking point in football, and to keep up to date with all of the biggest injury news, as well as all the other football scores and updates from around the world, you can download the One Football app for absolutely free from the top line of the description. It's the best football app out there. I use them all the time, particularly in my research for Lincoln City games that I commentate. And now you can also watch a lot more live football on there as well, which is really cool to keep up to date properly with some actual decent matches around the world too. So if you want to help me and the channel out, you can download the app for absolutely free from the top line of the description. And if we jump a year into the future, we can see that the actual trend is kind of true, to be fair. You can see right down at the 20th place, Injury Proneness 20 do finish rock bottom of the table. I imagine they had the most injuries across the season. As we go up, you can see there is a general trend towards the higher injury proneness numbers being towards the bottom end of the table, and the lower injury numbers being higher up the table, but you can see some outliers. Injury proneness 16 and 19 finishing 3rd and 4th. They must have had a lot of injuries, and yet they finished so high up the table. Injury proneness 3, for example, have finished really low down the table, and they have been relegated. To me, this says that these teams have been doing a lot better with their tactics, with their cohesion, and with the overall squad balance and depth in the team to be able to keep grinding out the results or lack of results to get where they are in the table. So let's start off then with injury proneness 19 and compare it to injury proneness 1, because they are right at the top end of the table, but injury proneness 19 have finished above of injury proneness 1, despite the fact you would imagine that injury proneness 19 have had so many more injuries. So across the season, injury proneness 1 had 25 injuries, as you can see, much lower than the expected total of 86 across the season, and only 4 of them were more than 2 weeks as well. So obviously a lot less injuries than you would expect across the season, and not particularly severe injuries either. Injury proneness 19 had 93 injuries across the season, 23 of which were over 2 weeks as well. So a lot more injuries and a lot more serious injuries, but that's just due to the nature of there being a lot more injuries. The chance of them being more serious injuries are a lot higher. Also, a lot more of these injuries coming in matches as well, being fouled by other players or potentially injuring themselves while trying to foul other players, other than the training injuries that we saw with injury proneness 1. But if we go back to the league table, of course, you can see that injury proneness 19 managed to beat injury proneness 1 in the table. And we can see some other similar situations across the experiment too. Injury proneness 14 have finished way above injury proneness 2. Injury proneness 2 had 38 injuries across the season, and 6 of them were over 2 weeks in length. Injury proneness 14 actually did really well for themselves. They only had 62 injuries across the season, down from the expected total of 108. And 15 of those injuries were over 2 weeks in length. But despite that, there's a 6-point gap between the two teams in the league, as you can see with injury proneness 14 finishing above them. Now obviously you can also make the counter argument and just say that injury proneness 19 and 14 are way up in the table and it's an anomaly, they shouldn't actually be there. If you replicated these results quite a few times, on average they'd be a lot lower down. But what we can do by looking at the data of injury proneness 19 and 14 is understand that actually the squad dynamics of these teams are really, really strong. And that means that as soon as someone's injured and someone comes in, they are fully capable of being able to play in that team. If we look at the dynamics of injury proneness 19, every single player is in the exact same core social group. Everyone is really happy and morale is pretty good for the most part. Essentially what I think I'm getting from this video is that if you manage your squad dynamics well and your player happiness well, then you can overcome some really big issues such as an injury crisis in your team. And this is going to open up some more avenues for investigation down the line. But I need your guys' help in it. What do you think we need to be investigating and how should we be doing it? Let me know down in the comments below.